setting the stage for what's going on in Daniel's time and what's going on in our time. Jeremiah chapter 29, verses 13 and 14. Who's there? All right, we have a reader. Nick, let's come right here to Dave, right here on the front. Jeremiah 29, verses 13 and 14. Go ahead. Dave had his hand up first. I'm sorry, Robert. Dave had his hand up first. We'll get you one here in a second.
And you shall seek me and find me when you shall search for me with all your heart. And I will be found of you, saith the Lord, and I will turn away your captivity, and I will gather you from all the nations, and from all the places whither I have driven you, saith the Lord. And I will bring you again into the place whence I caused you to be carried away captive.
So what is the promise that God is giving to the people that will pay attention to what God is saying? He'll bring you. He'll free you. He'll set you free. He's restoring. So listen to this. Daniel then, the book of Daniel, is the culmination of God's long-announced judgment over impenitent people. Can you agree with that? Does it make sense? You need to hear that again? So now, let me ask you a question. What is the second coming all about?
To bring to conclusion the whole matter, the whole Bible.
Is not the second coming the culminations of God's long-announced judgment over impenitent people? Is it not the same thing? It really is. You see, the Old Testament is foreshadowing the New Testament and the second coming. It's amazing. When I studied this early in the week, now I'll have to admit to you, some of the days that I studied, my mind was a little foggy. We would work so hard. Breakfast was at 7:30, and we would work so hard. One night we were in bed by 7:30. And so we would get up about 6 o'clock, and we would study, and then we'd get ready to go up for breakfast and be ready. So some of my early morning studying, my mind might have been a little bit in a fog. But this came through to me just as clear as if I was looking at the picture painted on a wall. God is longing for people who are not following Him, who are not with Him, to get on board and be with Him and not have to go through all of this mess that the people in Daniel went through and what people at the end times are going to have to go through. And actually what we're going through right now in preparation for that. Life isn't easy for everybody today, is it? In the church or out of the church, life's not easy, is it? No. Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
In this context, Barry, it really places a great privilege, but it also a great burden on our shoulders who know about this whole controversy.
Oh, yeah.
To not be sitting in our ivory towers. Amen. And, I mean, around this church, there are hundreds of homes.
Oh, yeah.
And probably none of them have heard this message of hope and salvation that we have the opportunity to share.
I agree. And it's more than us just coming here on Sabbath morning. This is a much broader, and for God's people in the time that we're talking about, 722 BC and before then even, it is vitally important for God's people to get the message out to everybody that there's a day of reckoning coming for all of this. We have to get our own house in order before we can really help the other houses get in order. You can't invite people to your house to gain order if your house is out of order. I don't think that you can. Am I wrong?
A dead person can't help anyone.
And you can be a dead person walking just as easy as you can be a dead person sleeping. Okay?
That's what the dry bones were all about.
In Ezekiel, that's what the dry bones were all about. But thank God those bones came back to life and they were recoupled. And I love the song that tells about how all those bones got put back together. Man, I'm telling you, it's an awesome song. And it really drives home the message, yes.
And one of the verses we just read, I think it was Jeremiah, it's the Lord, we read, it's the Lord says, I will not be angry with you forever. Please come back to me. And even in Revelation, there are specific verses in Revelation when the seven trumpets and the seven bowls are being poured out, and Jesus says, I wish that none of them would be lost.
That's right.
Turn from your evil ways. See what, you're in the Revelation, especially the plagues and the bowls being poured out. And there are times where people can change their mind and still accept it until the very last minute. He's begging people.
That's right.
Stop, why sin and die when you can turn to me and live?
That's so important for us to understand. Satan's whole purpose is to distract people from knowing the real God. He wants us to get set in our mind that God is this arbitrary God. He's this mad God. He's out to get everybody. He's walking around with a hammer wanting to hit everybody he can. And that's what Satan gets implanted in people's minds. Why would people that don't know Christ want to come to God in Christ if that's what they think about Christ? Why would you want to do that? That's not attractive, is it? God is just the opposite. Go ahead.
I believe Jesus presence on earth showed that to be a lie because his love, he displayed only love and my God, good behavior. That's not an excuse.
I don't disagree with you, but the fact of the matter is that people are not buying into the life of Christ on earth, or the churches everywhere would be full and running over all the time because they want to associate with Jesus. Is that smart thinking? Am I wrong? But if people are not in love with Jesus, they don't care about coming here because they're afraid they're going to hear something that they're not going to like, or that whatever it might be, Go ahead.
The churches are being so misrepresented. The people that are in it, even the leaders of the church. I talked to a lady this week who said her daughter and her husband had been thinking about coming to church, and they finally came. And as soon as they got there, the first thing the pastor started doing was preaching about money. And she said he came on so strong that they left and got a bad taste in their mouth. And she said, pray for my son and his daughter, and I have been, that they will come back. But this is what's happening. I mean, it's like they came there, they were seeking, and they wanted a message instead. They got bombarded about the financial part of the church, and that doesn't sit well with people sometimes like that.
When Kathy and I began as lay people to come back into the work, not as paid workers for the church as I was before I retired from the church, but as lay people. And once I became really converted in my heart and rebaptized, our whole mission is to try to show Jesus as a loving Jesus, not this arbitrary Jesus, and help people fall in love with Jesus. If people are in love with Jesus, you can explain to them about money and about giving, and they will accept it in a way because they see Christ in it, you see. But if they're not in love with Jesus and you haven't helped them fall in love with Jesus, you can preach about Jesus' shed blood on the cross and they still won't like it.
My father's excuse all the time for not going to church was, all they want is your money. And I said, Daddy, who do you think is going to pay those bills? Who's going to pay their lights? Who's going to pay the pastors? He said, Daddy, they have to ask for money. But this is just an excuse that they use,
So let me share this with you. In case you haven't read it recently, when they were building the tabernacle, the people gave gifts. Moses had all the instructions about how all this was to be done, right? And the people gave willingly, and there's no record of Moses standing up week by week by week and browbeating the people about coming. The people gave so much money that the workers said, stop giving, we've got all the money we need.
That's pretty awesome.
Let me ask you a question. Is that not possible today?
Yes, it is possible.
Okay, I just wanted to be sure. I believe that way, but I wanted to be sure. Okay. All right, so now we need to turn to history for a little bit, and I'm going to go through this part quick. I don't want us to get bogged down. We have 2 more sections to get into. Number 1, in 722 BC, the Assyrians brought northern Israel. Remember now, in this time, there's northern Israel and then there's Judah. So that could be southern Israel, if you want to say it that way. Northern Judah, 722, the Assyrians brought northern Israel into captivity and brought northern Israel to an end and deported vast populations of the portions of the population to other parts of the empire. In 722, northern Israel was brought to an end as a nation, and everybody was just spread out all over the place. Okay? In a few years later, Judah, that's southern Israel, did not pay attention, and Judah, met the same fate as northern Israel did in the hands of the Babylonians. 605 BC was the first deportation against Judah. Nebuchadnezzar defeated the Egyptians in a battle, and he marched against Judah. Then the second time, 597 BC, is when Nebuchadnezzar took Daniel and the worthies into captivity and brought them to Babylon. Now it's interesting, during that time, when all of these captivities were going on, Nebuchadnezzar and even the Assyrians did this to an extent, but the Babylonians especially did not care anything about the poor people. They left the poor people, after they had ransacked the land and destroyed everything, they left the poor people where they were and took all the rich, educated people with them, and they became the captives. So it's only natural that the people that were left would really have a struggle, maybe even just die off. That was the intent of Nebuchadnezzar, to leave all those people out there by themselves, and they would either die off or somebody else would come along and kill them or whatever happened to them. But he took all the cream of the crop to where he wanted them at, and that's where Daniel and the 3 Hebrew worthies find themselves. Then in 586, Nebuchadnezzar lost patience with Judah. Between 597 and 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar did exhibit some patience towards the people, even though they were in very trying circumstances. This time in 586, he raised Jerusalem. Is there a text about Jerusalem being raised? Then he destroyed the temple, and he took another large chunk of the people into captivity. Man, this is discouraging, isn't it? Over and over and over again, this is going on. So this is the context that we find Daniel in. It's the context that we find the people in, and it's the context that if we really examine ourselves, we can find ourselves in 2020 in this same situation if we're not making sure that we're grounded and steadfast with our decision to follow Jesus all the way, I believe. What do you think? Is it possible that we can find ourselves in the same situation? I think so. So now let's talk about the education of Daniel. How many, or what are the specific schools that Daniel and his friends attended? This week, as you studied, there's talk about Daniel's education, the Hebrew culture. Well, okay. Was that the only school that they went to? What was the other school that they went to?
The astrology and cultural. They have to learn the culture. They have to learn about astrology.
All of that's part of the Babylonian culture.
You're bringing it back to their home training.
I'm bringing it back to their home training and the Hebrew way and what established for them the dietary principles and all these things that they had already committed in their heart.